Oh, hi Susan, how you doing? Okay, let me see. Where the heck did I go? Where am I? Where am I? Okay, I can get rid of that. That was Carolina's right before you. And then here's your, and then, all right, so cool. Let's go ahead and take a look. So below is my timeline developed in Illustrator. Look forward to your critique. Hopefully you're all having a great week. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. I've got this open in, thank you so much for including the PDF because I've got that PDF open and we can go ahead and take a look at it right over here. So, all right, so, okay. Let's just ignore this little camera that's in the way right here. We'll just start from here and then I'll have to move this over when we get to that point. But I think you got a really good start. I think there's some comments I have that are going to make really good sense to you. Um, this is why it's just so important for us as designers to get as many eyes on our work as possible. I told that story about running my work. I've since moved, but my old neighbor had kids that were brutally honest, and I used to run my work by them. I do work for a children's clothing company. It's illustration work for a children's clothing company, and they're often introducing new characters to kind of show the style of clothes. And it is this type of illustration. It's casual illustration, but I was having a lot of difficulty in kind of the user testing stage of those projects, of that project, because I didn't really have anybody I could run that was of the age group that was the primary viewer of the illustrative work that I had done. And here the whole time I'm kind of assuming that I'm designing or illustrating for adults, when in reality I'm illustrating for kids. So what better test group than other kids? So I started showing my work to my neighbors' kids, and that kind of morphed into, okay, I'm doing a work for a design ad, a magazine ad for a wedding efficient company. Why the heck not? I'm going to go show this to those kids and I'm going to see what their reaction is. So I would point to it and I would say, okay, so what do you think this means? And where do you look first on the page? And just got amazing, amazing feedback. So, so the more eyes that we see, the more eyes we have on our work, the better. That's 10 times out of 10. It's the old saying, two eyes are better than one, right? Two sets of eyes are better than one. Okay, first initial reaction is I think some of the illustrations are a little small in areas. So I want you to think of scale. I really want you to think of scale in this particular um, set of illustrations. So for example, I mean, is this little guy over here, is he close enough in proximity? Is he large enough that we know that he's actually interacting with the cake? Good job tilting the candles away. Let's get some wind blowing out of his or her mouth, I would say. That's her, right? Yeah, that's her mouth. So, but I think she's just too far from the cake. I think that, in terms of proximity, I think we can get her a little closer. I'm not real sure. She's also the only element that's completely off the page. So that's an anomaly that may have to be addressed. Think about that. Other things, like she's really small in this, so I'm not real sure if we're even really getting a good look at her. All right. Now, one thing I would do here is I would reinforce the fact that this and this are the same person, and I would do that by including her shoulders up there with the pink sweater. The viewer's going to make that connection. It's going to be subconscious at first, but the viewer is definitely going to make that connection. Right now, that connection could be lost, so that the viewer could theoretically get to this and go, who's she? Do you see what I'm saying? By just adding the shoulders and the color of the sweater she's wearing here is going to alleviate that issue. Same thing here. Okay, I think that the one thing I'm seeing is a lack of contrast. And this is very, very common, specifically with relatively newer designers. And contrast is something you want to check all your work for contrast. One of the best ways to check for contrast is to look at your work from a distance. If you don't have the work printed out, the next best thing to do is to zoom out. And if we zoom out here, we can see we're losing, the narrative is a little lacking in contrast. And I say that because right now, if we zoom out even further, we see that we've lost a lot of detail. For example, we no longer can see the line that connects the illustrations. We can no longer see that this line is coming out of the dental floss. We don't see the shapes behind these at all. That all points to contrast. So recommendations here. Let's use black for the dental floss. Okay. Also, the shapes for the backgrounds, that's an interesting technique. And I really think that you've done a good job on it. Most will default to placing the narratives in a shape, but giving this kind of organic relationship with the picture plane and the entire story, I think is a really interesting approach. That said, as we saw with our little test and contrast, the parent value, the hue, the parent hue, the value associated with the parent hue is just, there's no contrast. I would definitely darken up, add a little contrast to those background shapes in terms of changing the hue, the value of the hue. Things like this, thought bubble, instead of having those clear with the color of the background, let's get a white background there. That's going to make a connection between her and the thought bubble itself. So it's going to be really apparent and obvious that that is her thought, as opposed to, as we see, as we zoom out, we now lose the thought bubble. So that becomes an incomplete thought, so to speak. The illustration, I think the illustrations could be fine-tuned. I think that she's a little underdeveloped as far as her hair goes. I mean, it's definitely a defining characteristic. Not bad at all, but I'd like to see you address her ponytails, make those a little bit more regular. The same thing with the mom's hair. The mom's hair is really basic, so we would want to try to develop that as more of a recognizable feature of the mom, is her hair. And then, of course, we can always go in right here and here. You've added some highlights to the tree, and that just speaks volumes to the technique. I would recommend adding more highlight shadow areas to depict depth, dimension, and volume. Balloons are a great area at the base of the tree. The kids' skin tone, sides of their faces, just be sure to use a consistent light source when you're depicting those shadows and highlight areas. Right here is a confusing frame because right now this last scene seemingly is the same as the first. However, the tree is now on the right side instead of the left side. So that's a little problematic, a little confusing. And then again, right here, these kids in the background here, they've got their cake. And they're sitting at the table, right? But we can barely see that, and I'm not even really zoomed out very much. So I would say let's get a close-up instead of that whole thing. Let's just show the tabletop and a closer version of them, maybe something like this, with the cake in front of them, the table visible, and the tree and the balloons visible too. So we're equating this scene with the final scene with actually increasing kind of the zoom factor associated with that particular illustration. My final comment is this. Well, actually, it's never my final comment. I can go on forever, right? But I think right here, areas like this, that knife, add a black stroke, thin black stroke, that'll really emphasize that broken part of the knife and also increase the contrast so it is more visible at a greater distance. Same thing, thought bubble here, white background. That's going to add some punch. Watch, you'll see it's surprising. That's going to add some serious punch. I wouldn't use the arrows. I would just use, because right now the arrows are not reinforcing the fact that this is dental floss. I would say let's increase the size of this a little bit. It's really super important that the viewer recognizes this immediately as a little thing of dental floss. I think you could probably refine the illustration of the tooth to indicate that. And then we have black coming out instead of blue. And that, of course, rings to contrast, as mentioned earlier. Okay, I think that's what I have. Yeah, that's what I have. So really fantastic job so far. And definitely this thing's got, you're almost there. So I'm really looking forward to watching this. Fine tuning, sit back, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and just really start thinking. And don't forget to ask those around you for their opinions. Doesn't mean you have to take their opinion. It doesn't mean you even have to listen to their opinion. Just get where they're thinking from, and then you can start employing empathy in your illustrative work. And it's really, again, I just want to reiterate the importance of trying to get as many eyes on your work as possible, as early and often as possible in the design process. All right, Susan, sorry I took so long. Any questions at all, please let me know. Thank you very much.